Man, this text on my head is really stupid. Oh, we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is I, your host, McLateral, aka Mickey L. We're gonna work on that. We'll circle back around. We'll see. Anyway, we're back. We had a little hiatus. We did some planning. We are now back up the show on the road. We actually have some great guests lined up for the next couple of weeks. Drop a little bit about that at the end of the show. So you got to stick around, find out. It's the only way you're going to know. But if you're only going to be here for the beginning, you'll get to hear my takes on James Conner for whatever those are worth. They're worth about as much as his contract is, which is to say not much. For those of you who think James Conner is like somehow going to be the bell cow, which luckily seems to be none of you. I've been really impressed with fantasy Twitter on that one. Though Chase Edmonds, RB1 guys, like maybe just simmer down. Yeah, I think James Conner is going to be 2021 Jordan Howard from last year. I'm like calling it right now. It's like, it's not going to take, he'll get injured. Something will happen. I don't know if he survives the entire season on the roster. Especially if they draft someone like, which I think there's a chance they will in the later rounds. I don't think it'll be in Etienne necessarily. It could be a Gainwell, but I don't see it working out. I don't, which again, if you have Chase Edmonds, like it'll pay off at least a little for you. So that's always good news. In other good news, it seems that the 49ers might take Justin Fields. At least Vegas would have you believe that that's going to be the case. Justin Fields is now the odds-on favorite to be the 49ers draft pick. Not the quarterback, but the draft pick. As you know, I'm a firm believer that Jimmy Garoppolo will actually start out the season as the Niners quarterback. I believe he will actually finish the season as the Niners quarterback as well. I do not think he will start 2022 as the Niners quarterback. I think that's what will happen. Though Bill Belichick's always, the wrinkle in that we haven't quite figured out. What else? Huh. Boy, I'm kind of drawing a blank. Maybe there's someone who could come in, help, give me some stuff to talk about. Maybe our first guest. It's Sam Darrell. Well, what's up? How's it going?
Man, I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing? Hey, I got to make a comment on the James Conner comparison to Jordan Howard.
Let's get spicy.
Yikes. That's a big yikes comparison. I also don't really like James Conner very much. I don't know if he'll be as bad as, Jordan Howard. I mean, come on, man. He's Jordan Howard was running like 1 yard a carry and had a few touchdowns.
It was one carry for 1 yard and one touchdown for like 3 weeks in a row.
It's a very good point.
Put some respect on it. Yeah, I don't know that he has the health to do it. That's like my biggest area of concern. And especially if they draft someone, I think they will find him to be very replaceable. I think that's the other thing, especially because I think that they believe anyone can do it in that system, or at least Cliff Kingsbury believes that anyone can do it in that system. And largely, he's been kind of proven right. Like the running game isn't why that team can't make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
From a fantasy perspective, like Chase Edmonds was almost an RB2 this past year. I think he finished RB25 in PPR. Kenyon Drake was an RB2 this year. He performed like an RB1, RB2 for the 8 games he had the year before. Like Chase Edmonds looked good the one game he was healthy the year before. Like Kingsbury has produced running backs fairly well.
I feel like Cliff Kingsbury kind of believes in that the whole running backs don't matter category, possibly. Because, I mean, he said that Chase Edmonds is someone that could be...
a lot of things don't matter, but that's a whole separate issue. This is not a pro Kingsbury pod show host, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I totally agree, man.
So Sam, You're here. You're our
I am
first
here.
awesome guest of the evening. You are the co-host of another awesome show, the FPO podcast.
Yes.
At FPO podcast with 2 S's, or is that a typo?
That is a typo, and then there's an
Okay.
underscore at the end.
And then there's an underscore at the end. Great. Glad we're catching this live. And then you host that with Kane Rob as opposed to Kanye Rob, which it always autocorrects to in my head. Who's at Kane Rob on the Twitter, and Tanner Larson, who's at Tanner Larson 11 on the Twitter. I've listened to the show, love the show. Excited to be on the show, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get you on pretty soon here.
Still waiting on that invitation, a little hurt.
Hey, I gave you like an informal invitation before the show.
Hey, people don't get to peek behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Rule number 1.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Breaking rules already.
Jimmy Kimmel show when it first launches, dude. The green room is a prime ticket. That's where the party's at. You got to earn that spot.
That's true.
And then you're also a contributor to the Breakout Finder at breakout_finder. Read some of your work there as well. Love it. We'll get a little into that later. But first, we've already talked a bit about the Niners. We've talked a bit about the Cardinals. Let's get into another NFC team, your NFC team, your NFL team, the Minnesota Vikings. What are your expectations for 2021 and how will you be hurt?
Oh, gosh. They do hurt me a lot. And I'm just assuming that I'm going to get hurt again this year. And I think it's going to become very early, actually. And it's going to come in the NFL draft. Just because, here's the thing. I'm very much a proponent of playing to your strengths as a team. And, we've signed Kirk Cousins to a fairly large contract. We've also extended him, and we still refuse.
A fully guaranteed contract, I believe.
And we still, to this day, refuse to give him an above average offensive line. And so, if they don't pick, one of the 3 between Sewell, Slater, and I think Christian Darrisaw, the top 3 left tackles in the draft, I'm just going to be very sad. I think they'll all be there, but
I don't think Sewell will be there. Where are you guys picking?
I'm just saying we're 14. I'm saying I'm hoping one of them is there, and I think it'll probably be Darrisaw might be there. So,
I'd say one of them you definitely got a shot at. I just did my one and only mock draft. The only one I'm doing this season. I did it for Jordan Van Eck. He's got this charity mock draft.
Sure.
Retweeted about it. Feel free to check that out. And so I'm trying to see if I can pull it up and figure out.
Well, I can talk to you while you're pulling it up, but
let's vamp a little. Why not?
You said, I just feel like I'm gonna get hurt because they aren't gonna address the offensive line. We lost arguably our best offensive lineman in Riley Reif to free agency, and I'm just concerned about that part of it. However, we have upped our game on the defense, and I think our defense is going to be more like what it's been in the previous years, not last year, because last year was really bad. I think we were 27th or 29th in the league. But we have Danielle Hunter coming back. Yeah, it was really bad. So we have Danielle Hunter coming back. Eric Kendricks was out for a bit. Anthony Barr. We signed Patrick Peterson. So I think it's gonna, take a turn and, kind of be like the old Vikings.
You had, what'd you have? You had Yannick Ngakoue for a hot second.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, don't even get me started on that. We basically traded back to have Yannick Ngakoue on our team for 2 games. And then we went back 15 picks in the second round, which.
And then you gave him to the Ravens. You just
made
the rich richer.
What are you doing? But, I know, dude. It's so sad. But I actually think they're going to be pretty good this year. Our offense still has plenty of weapons on it. I'm a huge Kirk fan. I know a lot of Vikings fans aren't, but I love Kirk Cousins. He's hyper accurate, he's just he's a good quarterback. And if he had an offensive line, I'd make comparisons to someone like Drew Brees, where he didn't really have that many weapons throughout his career. I mean, he usually had a pretty decent one, but his offensive line was always good, and Drew Brees was just always able to have that time, to light it up. So I like Kirk Cousins, obviously Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook. So I think we'll be a playoff team, but it'll be again. So we almost made it this past year, and I think we're just gonna, hopefully the injury bug doesn't plague us again on defense, and I think we make the playoffs just barely, but not Super Bowl contender. I'm not going that far.
Yeah, I think you guys got hit a little bit with the COVID issue. I think you guys were going to be a rebuild on defense, and then you never got a chance to rebuild.
No,
I was higher on the Vikings D than a lot of people were, because I was just Zimmer's a defense, like he's a coach
Yeah.
that can handle defensive rebuild. Like they've got some talented pieces. And then with COVID, with Danielle Hunter being that, was just like it never stood a chance. You are in luck though, because I do think you guys will pick up Christian Darrisaw. He's who I've got mocked to the Minnesota
Yeah,
Vikings.
I'm really hoping so. So yeah, that'd be awesome.
Well, from a fantasy perspective, obviously Dalvin Cook, we expect to be good. Do you think he'll be the RB1? Should we maybe save that for later? If you do,
yeah, we could save that for later.
Yeah, but
let's
who
save
else?
that for later.
You guys have some offensive talent. Kirk Cousins, QB1 contender, not QB1 overall, by the way, before the mentions just start flooding. Just a QB1.
QB1.
Yeah. But Dalvin Cook, an actual the RB1 contender, and then Justin Jefferson, some would like to believe a wide receiver one contender. There's talent on that team.
Yeah. I think people aren't going to like this, but I think people are going to be disappointed with the pass catchers, at least Justin Jefferson this year.
Because
the thing is like, because our defense was so bad last year, we were forced to throw more than we wanted to, and I think if you go back to 2019, which I think our team is going to look like more, what happened when people were drafted Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs that year? They were disappointed. Diggs didn't even go over 1,000 yards because they're running the ball and they play good defense, and I think that's what the Vikings want to do. So, I think there might be some disappointment there, especially with Justin Jefferson because of the hype, also, but I think in some ways, Adam Thielen had 14 touchdowns and Justin Jefferson only had 7. So I think in some ways, like the yards will come down for Justin Jefferson, maybe more touchdowns. Adam Thielen will probably have more yards, less touchdowns, and things kind of balance out a bit. But I think there's going to be some disappointment, but I still think both of them easy top 20, just not top 10.
I would agree. I think Jefferson even has a shot at top 10. I don't think he has a shot at being the wide receiver one.
No,
because I do agree. Like you got Dalvin Cook there, you're going to use him plenty. They like to be an efficient team, though. Cousins can air it out a little bit. Yeah. Okay, well, all right. We'll keep. Things are not looking bad for the Vikings. They're just not going to be amazing.
Right, exactly.
Well, let's focus on just some things that are amazing. You, our lovely guest.
Oh, thanks.
So, how did you get into fantasy football? What was the first experience?
Yeah. So I don't have like a super interesting backstory. I guess I started about 10 years ago when I was in high school. One of my co-hosts, Tanner, was the one that kind of got me into it. I do have a kind of a funny story about, it was either my first or second season playing. It was about week 3, and I dropped to Jordy Nelson for Torrey Smith in his rookie year, I believe. And it was like the game that Torrey Smith decided to go off for like 3 touchdowns. And I was like, oh my gosh, my first time. I was like, this guy's so good. And Jordy Nelson disappointed. And I got absolutely roasted by my league mates for doing that. Because then it was everyone trying to scramble to grab Jordy Nelson that year. So that was like one of the things. And then the thing that kind of kept me around was, some of my buddies, we would, before we drafted every year, we would take a trip out to like this island on this lake that we lived near, and we would camp and we just talk fantasy football for like 10 hours straight, sit around a bonfire. And it was always a good time. And eventually I just kind of ended up on Twitter.
Okay. Well, so yeah, let's go right in that. I'll skip over, my love of Torrey Smith, Maryland product that he is. How did you get into content creation? Seems Twitter was an early part of it.
Right.
But what got you going down the road?
Yeah. So Kane Robb, he's a good friend of mine from college. His name is actually Kanan, which a lot of people don't know. But you know how you're saying that you keep thinking it was Kanye? Like people
definitely
mispronounce.
Autocorrects, yeah.
Yeah. So his name was Kanan, Kaynen, and people always would say Keenan or like Kenyan. Yeah. And so he was like, you know what? I'm just not going to worry about it. We'll do Kane and we'll leave it simple. So that's kind of funny that you mentioned that. But he, I think, was on Twitter before I was. And then 2 summers ago, he asked myself and Tanner, who was a childhood friend of mine, to just start up a podcast. So we started doing an FPO, and we did 5 or 6 episodes just for fun. I was like 100 followers at the time, not doing too much. And then we stopped, but I kind of just stayed on Twitter, and I just loved interacting with people, and eventually I don't know how I got 2,000 followers. I'm at like 1,200 now because I really didn't put out that much content. But one of the questions that I saw on the show sheet was just advice for people, and I think that one of the things I try to be as much as possible is just being authentic, and just being myself, and just trying to have some fun because that's what this game is, right? We're just here to shoot some shit, play some fantasy football, watch some football, something we love to do. So, I think that's
it's supposed to be fun.
I think so.
I've been out here
works.
like an asshole to everyone.
Yeah.
I thought we were supposed to bust everyone's balls, tell them why they're idiots, and just like absolutely like completely dehumanize them. Have I been doing it wrong this entire time?
Probably. Yeah. I'm sorry to break it to you on show. We're live, and I know.
The news is you're wrong. You're an asshole. And moving on. No, that is great advice. Could not agree more. I think finding your brand, being authentic, doing something that is not going to be the same as everyone. Like,
right.
That's certainly our goal at the Lateral. You guys with the FPO podcast, like that is definitely something different, something you can't just find anywhere. I think you guys are nailing it. And you also seem to be oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I would add like one or two more things to that list of things that as far as content creation, because
that's why we got you here.
The thing is like, I still have a long way to go, I think, as far as like, I don't know, getting myself out there. And, like right now, like this is only the second podcast I've been on outside of my own. But I think the biggest thing is also just finding what you're good at. And not being afraid to admit that like, oh, I'm not good at this, or I'm not very good at this. Like I've written a few articles, but I just don't think it's my strength. Like I can, write some stuff. I like being analytical. I went to college and got a math minor, but honestly, I've also been performing my whole life. I sing and I've been performing, in college and high school. And so like, when it comes to podcasting, I just it feels more natural to me. And I think that's something I want to start leaning into. And I think that would be the same recommendation for other people, is just lean into your strengths. And I guess that was my other tidbit on that.
No, I think that is a great idea. Again, couldn't agree more. Do what you're good at, not what you think everyone says you should do. Like,
right, exactly.
If you're not good at putting out a weekly waiver wire article, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. But if you're good at doing a weekly game show, but it's fantasy related, people want to watch, people want to listen, like, we'll do that. That is what will get you success. That is what will also, more importantly, bring you enjoyment throughout this whole process.
Exactly. Yep.
Does DFS bring you enjoyment? Because I know you mentioned it in your Twitter bio.
Yes, it does. It brings me a lot of enjoyment. Actually, it's something I've been trying to spend more time on. I've been trying to cut back on leagues, as everybody says. Everyone tries to cut back on leagues. It never happens. I'm really trying to hold strong because I do want to try to play DFS more and spend some more time in that. It's just something that I've found a lot of enjoyment in. I mean, I know that some people don't like it because it's gambling, kind of, but in my mind, like, so is all of fantasy. We're all just gambling and spending money on it. So I'm like, I just enjoy it a lot. And, I've spent about 2 years now. I've made just only a couple $100, but a couple $100 is a couple $100, and I'm hoping to try to build up a bigger pool, because I've seen, like, man, you can make a lot of money if you have enough money, into DFS. And so it's something I'm just still, I have a process, but I'm still just dipping my toes in the water on DFS. So
I'd say a couple things. One,
sure,
you got to get in touch with our boy Jordan Vanik's absolutely phenomenal at the DFS
I would love to
stuff.
talk. I love DFS, so I'd love to talk to him.
Two, I think if 2020 has taught us anything, breathing is a bit of a gamble. So, actually gambling, maybe not so bad. Live a little. But why don't you touch just a little bit on that process that you've started developing?
Right. So my biggest thing, and this is going to kind of foreshadow a little bit in what we might talk about in a little bit here, but I've always been a big proponent of highly emphasizing process. Not even specifically looking at players, but literally just looking at an archetype of what, brings success in fantasy football. And in DFS, there's two different types you can play, right? There's cash games and there's GPPs. Essentially, cash games are like head-to-heads or, double ups where like you don't have to necessarily shoot for upside. It's more like redraft where you just kind of like draft best players, go for the floor. But I like to play tournaments. And when you play tournaments, you have to hit the perfect lineup in that week. And so like, my process usually, I looked at the Millie Maker last year for like the first 10 weeks. I think I was looking at it. There was an archetype, and it was pick a high scoring game, run a quarterback from either side with actually two pass catchers and a pass catcher from the other side, or a running back from the other side. And that was like, just like you have to have that every time, and so that's something I really try to play into. Stacking is a huge deal in DFS. And if you're not doing it in tournaments, like you're setting yourself up to fail, even if it seems like a weird stack. Like I think a fun stack this year leading up might be something like throwing in Daniel Jones with Kenny Golladay and Sterling Shepard. Like I don't like Daniel Jones too much, but he's probably going to be cheap in DFS. And Kenny Golladay, we know, is a very good wide receiver, and so those are the types of things we like to think about in DFS. And like I said, I'm still kind of dipping my toes into it, but I've made money on it, so I've been successful so far, and I hope I don't lose a lot of money. That's all I'm here for.
Yeah, I think Giants fans and David Gettleman are hoping that you're right about that fun stack with Kenny Golladay and Daniel Jones. Otherwise, that's going to be a long 17 games.
Right.
Speaking of games, game theory, you're a big proponent of it. You love tying it into fantasy. Right. Why don't you explain to the layman, possibly myself, what game theory is and how you tie it into fantasy football?
Right. So I think I was trying to, I want to put this in the easiest way I can, but the way I like to think about it is there's three kind of pillars to like, I guess game theory is how you're putting it, or how I put it. And I think it's roster construction, there's drafting and trading, right? And like I said before, we can do a ton of research into what we think what players are going to be good this year, what players are values. But if we aren't setting our roster up to succeed and what normally succeeds, then, it doesn't really matter, So, for example, I like to go robots running back, and there's a guest coming on later, that also has what's this thing? Zero wide receiver, and I wrote an article about it, and it's essentially just, man, you just got to get those top end running backs. And whether it's traditional scoring, whether it's half PPR, whether it's PPR, it doesn't matter. It is extremely hard to win a fantasy championship without one of those top running backs. And
I absolutely think you're onto something. I think there's a reason that there's a lot of people that are proponents of robust running back or zero wide receiver, depending on what you call it. And I did read that article from the Breakout Finder where you talk about this. And I think you showed a lot why even in PPR, you still need to do this. Like you talked about, it's like people want to be grabbing like Michael Thomas or Devontae Adams in the first round. And like, well, that may still pay out a dividend, the drop off between an RB1 and an RB2 versus a wide receiver one and a wide receiver two, it's statistically significant.
Yep. And you can't deny that. Like it's statistics, like there's no bias in that, and that's why I like to work with numbers as much as I can. I don't do it too often, but I do like to, and I like to try to base a lot of things. So to make sure that I'm checking myself, when I'm looking for players, because I think when you're like researching specific players, like those are micro advantages, right? Like those are the ways you can kind of find late round wide receivers or running backs or whatever that are going to help you. But on a macro level, you have to have the right process, or otherwise you're setting yourself up to essentially be an outlier, So yes, that's important. Also, if you don't mind me segueing, keep going with this article thing.
Segue away.
I'm about to admit something that I just discovered right before this podcast.
That kickers exist?
That's true. They do exist. It's not that, though. I actually fell short a little bit in my research in my article, and I didn't realize it till just now. I was actually just one step too short. But actually, what's funny is that my theory in my article was essentially between traditional and PPR scoring. When you look at, the wide receiver and running back data set, I imagine that the running back data set is pulling apart and that the wide receiver data set is crunching together, essentially raising the floor of wide receivers. And I didn't actually find that in my original findings, but then I realized I was one step too short and I wasn't looking at percentages. I won't go into the math behind it, but it actually proved that my theory was right, and that it was raising the floors of wide receiver 2s and 3s, and even back end wide receivers 1s, further putting that premium on top end running backs, even in PPR, actually especially in PPR. So I'm excited to talk to our next guest about some zero wide receiver robust running back stuff. But
that does totally make sense. Not only is there still the larger gap between your RB2 and your RB1, but now you're bringing up the floor of your wide receiver 2s and your wide receiver 3s, meaning that there is more value in those picks comparatively.
Right.
Totally get it. All makes sense. Yeah. What you said that got left out a little from your article. Was there any other takes, any other info that got left out possibly?
Well, in a tweet that I put out, I said that Zeke was going to be my RB1 for the year. That was I don't know if I actually believe that. It was probably more of a hot take, me just trying to seek for attention. I do that sometimes. Come on, everybody does it. It's fun. But
I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm full of integrity. I've never done such a thing in my life.
But on a real note though, Zeke was RB3 through the first 5 weeks when Dak was playing. So it's not out of the question that Ezekiel Elliott could finish as running back 1. I know people like to assume that he was washed last year and Tony Pollard is going to come back. But if we're also, not only did he lose Dak, but the offensive line for the Dallas Cowboys was absolutely torched last year. And they had Andy Dalton starting, and then they also had who was the other backup that they played? It was like Cooper Rush or something. I don't remember who it was. I know Cooper Rush was
Lateral.
Come on.
Ben Ganucci.
Oh, yeah, Danucci. Yeah, man. There you go.
The new.
So, yeah, exactly. So, and that whole team was just not as efficient, and it was really tough to score any fantasy points for all of those players. They have a crap ton of talent on that team, and I really think that team is just going, the nooch. But I do think Ezekiel Elliott absolutely has RB1 in his range of outcomes. He's actually never hit RB1 numbers. And so, I think Zeke is still a generational running back. And we've seen players like him produce elite fantasy seasons at a later age. He's only 25. He'll be 26 going into 2021. We saw Adrian Peterson put up an elite season at age 28. I still believe in Ezekiel Elliott, even though I may not entirely believe he'll be the actual RB1 for the season.
Yeah, I mean, so RB1s from last season in PPR, you got number 7, James Robinson, number 8, Josh Jacobs, number 9, Ezekiel Elliott, number 10, Kareem Hunt, number 12, Mike Davis. Wouldn't shock me if Ezekiel Elliott's the only one that's on that list again next year.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was literally the worst situation he could have been in. He won't be in a situation like that again unless Dak breaks his ankle and the, Dallas Cowboys line just goes, gets hurt again. But yeah, I think that's all I got for that. Oh, Barry Sanders hitting 2K at 29. That's what I'm talking about, man. Ezekiel Elliott's one of those guys. He's hashtag good at football. So
yeah, I would say Barry Sanders hashtag good at football, Ezekiel Elliott hashtag good at football.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll find out, I guess, once this drops on Spotify, if my internet connection is hashtag good at being connected, because I might have had just a little lag in there, but I think I caught everything that you said at the very least. So for our Spotify listeners, we're on Spotify now. Go check us out. I don't think they'll have noticed, except for the fact that I just totally mentioned it right then.
Right. Now they definitely know.
And I guess I should also mention that we have another guest tonight.
Yeah.
It is the one, the only, David, I'm going to butcher his last name, Kluge?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Congrats on making that very short list of people that have actually gotten it right on the first time.
Like being on short lists, better than being on long lists or black lists.
Yeah, I was watching this show leading up to my segue coming in, and I mean, you guys are hitting everything that I like talking about. Ezekiel Elliott, robust running backs, late round wide receivers. You guys are speaking my language already.
Well, Dave, member of the Football Guys staff at FBG News on the Twitter, and a writer for Fantasy Pros, and I believe I've got here NFL and NBA, but you also do some Major League Baseball, I think I was catching.
I did a while back. Not doing it this year. trying to balance all three of those sports at once is nearly impossible. You know, it was fun doing it last year, but it is not something that I will ever be doing again.
It's tough enough as a fan, like especially like that moment when NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball like hit that perfect like October moment. It's just like, oh my God, I can barely keep it straight. And honestly,
what I do at Fantasy Pros are the game recaps too. So there were just games nonstop. So I'd wake up in the morning and I would just be spending 4 hours just writing game recaps to start my day. You know, it was just getting thrown into the fire last season, figuring out by making some mistakes.
Well, I would just like to point out that I heard rioter for the football guys, and I was trying to imagine Dave rioting for the football guys. That like I don't even know. Are we going to like RotoWire? Are we going to Underworld rioting or something?
Hey, this is a family-friendly show. We're going to keep the talk about rioting guys to a minimum.
Sorry.
But we'll also mention that Dave does our Friday show with Steffi Smalls, a rising star of the industry, as we're all aware. She hit 10K this past week. I guess I could mention that she's at Steffi Smalls with 3 L's on Twitter, but y'all probably know that already. And y'all probably know that Dave is a Jay Cutler apologist. And I want to know why.
Yeah, I mean, this is an answer that I feel like I have pretty well rehearsed because a lot of people ask me about it. You can see this helmet right over my shoulder. I'm pointing to it. It's got a Jay Cutler signature on it. I mean, I was thrilled when we made the move. I still remember being at work. You know, this was before texting was even a big thing. This is when you're paying for text and getting a phone call from somebody saying that we signed Jay Cutler. And I think that they made the right choice by trading for him. He was 25 years old at the time, coming off a 4,500-yard Pro Bowl season. He had all of the makings to be a premier quarterback in the league. And it's one of those weird situations where like you never see a 25-year-old superstar quarterback getting traded. That's just not something that happens in the NFL. The Bears were in a really weird situation where Josh McDaniels came in there and decided that he was just going to uproot the entire organization. Him and Cutler, their egos were clashing, and the Bears were able to get this young stud. So I already mentioned the 4,500 yards, but in his final year with Denver, Cutler took 11 sacks. So let's fast forward 2 years now, 2 years into Chicago. He took 87 sacks in his first 2 years, 11 with Denver, 87 in his first 2 years with Chicago. I can't even make this up. So you'd think that they'd go out and, you know, sign in an offensive lineman, do something to help protect him, right? No. Instead, they bring in Brandon Marshall and they bring in Martellus Bennett. And they just do things to try to put more weapons around him while not giving him the protection he needed. It was just a disaster. That whole tenure that Cutler spent here, in the 8 years that he played in Chicago, he had 5 different offensive coordinators. Show me any quarterback in the NFL that can survive going into a new offense almost every single year. So, you know, I think the fans, the media, they all gave him a really hard time. But what I say all the time, the worst thing that Jay Cutler had going for him was his face. He just had this droopy face. He just looked unengaged. And you didn't see it in his play. You know, in his play, he's dropping shoulders. He's running people over. He's laying out for the first down. He's putting his heart out on the field. But then he takes his helmet off, and he's just got this pouty lip, and people hated it. I think the guy never got a fair chance, honestly. I think had he stayed in Denver, you know, we'd be talking about him as one of the greats.
Interesting. And it's that have you come to this opinion because of all the Camel Light stench reeking from the Jay Cutler helmet? Like is the tobacco getting into your system?
My background on my computer is still a picture of Smoking Jay. It has been since the day he left Chicago. But I mean, it was just
that's amazing.
He was a fun player to watch. And I just, like I said, I don't know if anybody could really have succeeded in the position that he was put in. But really the big problem was once he started taking those licks in the first couple of years, you know, he was a very raw talent coming out of college and he had a lot of problems. He was a one-read quarterback, threw off his back foot all the time. And then you saw in his 3 years with Denver, him slowly getting better. And then he hit that year 3 where he made the Pro Bowl and just looked lights out. And then once he started taking those hits in Chicago, you saw him start to regress to all of those things that he had worked out of his system, throwing sidearm, throwing off his back foot, you know, just force feeding the ball to Brandon Marshall. So I think that Chicago ruined what could have been an all-time great.
Okay.
Wow.
I think you haven't fully convinced me, but you've definitely given me some food for thought.
You know, I just shared the article today. The GM from the Broncos that drafted Jay Cutler wrote an amazing piece. And it's not a quick read. I mean, this is something you've got to commit like 45 minutes to reading this article. But he's the guy that drafted Jay Cutler, and he talks about the entire situation where Josh McDaniels was infatuated with Tim Tebow, and 2 years before they even it's a bizarre story. But I would definitely recommend reading that.
I might have to check that out. Well, we'll keep it on the Bears. Maybe something more positive than Jay Cutler's tenure, though. Given how you feel about Jay Cutler, I'm not sure. What do you think? 2021, are you hoping for some better things? As far as, we'll start with some NFL production real quick, but then we'll look at fantasy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too overly optimistic. It just feels like a team that's destined to float somewhere around 500. The 17-game season. Who knows if they're going to finish at 7-8 or 8-7? But I don't see it being much better than that. And I think the biggest problem, I really wanted Andy Dalton last year when Andy Dalton, was leaving Cincinnati. I really wanted Andy Dalton, and then we saw him playing in Dallas, and there wasn't anything about his game that inspired me whatsoever. So now we go out and get him, and it's something that I wouldn't be that upset about. The reason I'm upset about it is because we got tantalized with Russell Wilson. Like, that is just the worst tease ever. Yeah, you dangle Russell Wilson in front of your face, and then when that doesn't work, hey, well, we got Andy Dalton for you instead. Now, I hate to even use the term championship window because the Bears really don't seem like a team that's going to make the Super Bowl, but they do have an elite defense that's aging quickly. So if there is any semblance of a championship window, this is probably the end of it right here. Akeem Hicks is 31. Khalil Mack is 30. They put together a great team that's been dominant on the defensive end of the ball for years now. But this is really probably the last year that they'll be able to make a push. So I don't know what to expect. I feel like Dalton, he's a decent veteran, but we still have those same O-line problems that have plagued us my entire life as a Chicago Bears fan. So I think that we're going to see a lot of Andy Dalton dropping back, not having any time to even go through his reads, and just getting teed off on.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, entirely possible. I don't see anything there that I would vehemently disagree with. I think Andy Dalton may surprise us all a little. I don't think he'll surprise us all a lot. Like, I don't think he's going to come out and be like elite or anything, especially given he's never been elite. But
take that back. He was an MVP front runner. What was it, back in 2013? He had that 1 year. Where he just came out of nowhere.
He has been very, very good at times. I will fully admit my dad's the one who I first heard talk about this term, but like, there's the Hall of Fame and then there's the Hall of Very Good. And like, Andy Dalton at his peak was a Hall of Very Good quarterback.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with
Phillip Rivers, to me, honestly, he's like right on that border of like, is he Hall of Fame or is he Hall of Very Good? I'm probably a little lower than a lot of people. I would say I put Ben Roethlisberger similarly around there, though, because of the ring, like maybe bump him into the Hall of Fame, but not as a first ballot guy. Like, to me, if you're going to be elite, like, I want to be talking truly elite. I want there to be no questions about your talent.
It's kind of weird now. It seems like any quarterback that just makes it through 10 seasons.
Justin Herbert's like, they're going. Like, we're all like, Justin Herbert, he's absolutely elite. And I'm like, okay, would you like to give me Lamar Jackson for him? Sure. Done.
Yeah.
Don't even get me started on the Julian Edelman Hall of Fame talk. It's just ridiculous.
We don't have to get you started. I think the consensus here is there is none.
Yeah,
he's a perfectly nice guy.
Dude, I just want to point out that, like, I felt like on Twitter, and I think I might have said this to Steffi, but I was like, it felt like someone said that Julian Edelman was going to go to or should be in the Hall of Fame, and then everyone freaked out and we're just arguing against nobody that Julian Edelman should not be in the Hall of Fame. That's a classic. Everyone's got to get their take on it. So
I will say that is
one guy. He's on his 18th Sam Adams, and he's like, "Oh, Julian Edelman, Hall of Fame," and then everyone just got fired up about it.
Yes, exactly.
That's definitely a fantasy Twitter staple, I have to say. 100%. Like, someone sees a take somewhere, and then like gets really fired up about it, and then people get fired up about it in the defense of that, and then my timeline is all just people agreeing with each other about why some mythical person is wrong. I'm like, you're right. Chase Edmonds isn't a running back one. Who thinks he is?
Yeah.
Well, I do think, though, that Allen Robinson is a wide receiver one. Is there anyone else on the Bears you think I should be on the lookout for in 2021? Perhaps David Montgomery, I think, is the really interesting one.
No, I'm not really sold on David Montgomery. He's shown some flashes of being decent, but he hasn't really done anything that's impressed me. What he had last year down the stretch was just it was just the perfect storm for a fantasy quarterback. The Minnesota Vikings defense was shredded. They had every single person pretty much injured. The Packers were just literally Swiss cheese on defense. Nobody could, anybody can run through them. So you've got David Montgomery, who has no competition whatsoever. Cordero Patterson is the only guy that was getting touches out of that backfield, and he was seeing 3 to 5 a game. So you've got no Tariq Cohen and just a cake schedule down the stretch. So I'm happy for David Montgomery. He won a lot of people fantasy championships last year, made a lot of people a lot of money, but that backfield got really crowded with Tariq Cohen coming back from his ACL injury, Damian Williams in there now, and we don't really know what to expect from Andy Dalton. So David Montgomery, I think that he might be able to bounce back, but looking at where he's ranked right now, that ADP is just way too rich for my blood. That being
what
said,
is his ADP?
I had to check. Last I saw, he was in the late teens, but I wouldn't be taking him anywhere outside of like the mid 20s at this point. With guys like, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Josh Jacobs, even there's so many other. When you look at that tier of running backs, he's the one that sticks out as having the absolute lowest floor of them all.
Right.
But you already hit on Allen Robinson. We've seen Allen Robinson put up wide receiver 1 numbers with Blake Bortles, Mitch Trubisky. It doesn't matter who's throwing the ball to him. So funny enough, Andy Dalton might be the best wide receiver that Allen Robinson has ever played with in his professional career. So I think
Andy Dalton is the best quarterback that Allen Robinson has ever played with, and I don't think it's particularly.
We won't even say might yet. We'll go ahead and say that. So
maybe Big Dick Nick. That's about it.
No, I mean maybe if he was playing with the Eagles a few years ago and captured that few weeks of magic, maybe. But the Nick Foles that played on Chicago was maybe the worst quarterback in the league. I mean, he was terrible last year.
But Nick Foles on Jacksonville was pretty bad.
You mean Mike Lennon?
No,
Nick Foles.
Nick Foles on Jacksonville.
Nick Foles played for Jacksonville when?
he got hurt.
They gave him a 3-year deal.
Yeah, they gave him a 3-year deal. It was he ran a touchdown drive on their first drive of the season and looked pretty sharp.
Oh, that's right.
And then he took that hit, went down, and then Minshew Mania took over because Nick Foles got hurt. Yep. So Allen Robinson, though, he's going to see 150 targets. He's going to see 1,000 yards. You can lock him in. I mean, I could go suit up as quarterback for the Bears, and I think Allen Robinson would still be able to find a way to get 1,000 yards. So I'm not worried about him. All this man has done is defied the odds his entire career. He's still going to be a low-end wide receiver 1.
Yeah.
What about Darnell Mooney?
I really like Darnell Mooney, but I don't like Andy Dalton throwing the ball to Darnell Mooney, and that's kind of my fear. Darnell Mooney, he's great at getting down the field. We saw it last year. He was just consistently blowing the top off of defenses and getting wide open. And Mitch couldn't make those throws. Foles couldn't make those throws. I don't think Dalton's going to be able to make those throws either. So unless we can bring in a young guy with a big arm, Darnell Mooney is just getting wasted on this roster, unfortunately.
And I think it kind of plays into what you're saying about the offensive line. Like if they're not giving Andy Dalton enough time to actually let those plays develop, Andy Dalton's, Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky were just throwing it up, because, they had to. And then they're just overthrowing Darnell Mooney. You see clips on Twitter, just absolutely atrocious. And you're like, come on, Darnell Mooney. So,
one of the big clips last year that was going around too was a play call coming in, and you see Foles take the play call and then start muttering like underneath his breath. And they talked
I did not see this.
And he said that what happened is Nagy kept calling these plays that took a long time to develop, where they're crossing receivers over the middle and running a play action. And he's like, I can't even finish my drop before I've got defenders in my face. And you're calling these plays that are taking 5 seconds to develop, and we don't have an offensive line. So his frustrations were very visible last year, and they've done nothing to improve that offensive line.
Yeah.
Well, that might be, I think, the real issue then for anyone who's hoping to view Andy Dalton as a streamer this year. If that offensive line isn't any good, it's going to be tough for him, I think, to be all that more productive, despite the fact that there are weapons on that Chicago offense.
So the Bears and the Cowboys offensive lines, according to PFF, were ranked within a couple spots of each other last year. So he's looking at a very similar situation with an offensive line. The only difference is we have Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney. He was playing with Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, Ezekiel Elliott. He was playing on a loaded offense with a bad offensive line and didn't look great. So now he's playing on a team with a bad offensive line without the weapons. I'm just not expecting that much.
Yeah, you have to give the play calling advantage, honestly, to Kellen Moore in Dallas. Is that who it is?
I believe.
Yes.
I know the Bears switched it up mid-season. They went from Nagy calling the plays to Bill Lazor calling the plays.
Lazor's not. I think I prefer Moore a little, but Lazor could be worse.
Didn't Nagy say he was going to call plays again, though?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Nagy's trying to save his hide. So actually, while we're on the subject, and then we'll transition, I think, out of Bears talk. Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, are they still around when we're talking about the Bears again this time next season?
Yeah, if they make the playoffs. And it's a weird situation because Matt Nagy, I mean, Mitch Trubisky was a terrible pick. There's no way around that. Trading up, I remember on draft night seeing the Bears traded up to 2. Me and my buddies are high-fiving. I'm like ready to order my Deshaun Watson jersey. And then Mitchell Trubisky? What? I mean, it was just gut-wrenching. So yeah. I don't think that he had a lot to work with Mitch Trubisky. But at the end of the day, Nagy's made the playoffs twice, and he's got a winning record. So it's, you hear it all the time that Nagy's on the hot seat, but it's like the same thing we saw with Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith was consistently putting out a team that was winning, make the playoffs every other year, and he got canned after a decent career. And it's just, Chicago fans are the absolute worst. I can say that as somebody born and raised in Chicago. Chicago fans suck.
As someone who hopes to travel to Chicago one day, I'm going to have no comment personally.
Beautiful city. Beautiful city. You'll love your time there, but don't try to tell any Bears fans that, just any reasonable conversation with them.
Fair enough. Sam, it seemed like you had a comment you wanted to make. I was just going to say, it kind of seems like, and I feel like since I've kind of tried to dive into fantasy football more and just learn more about just the game in general, it just kind of seems like the people that don't really care too much about football, but do watch football, which is the majority of people, just the casual fans, they just get impatient. Like they're just really impatient because the same thing with the Vikings in some sense. Mm-hmm. Mike Zimmer has been a fantastic coach for the Vikings. You made the playoffs 3 times, made an NFC championship, but people don't like him. I don't necessarily like him, but I still think he's an amazing coach, and so it's, there's a lot of, most fan bases are very similar, I think. And people I'm like, I can't stand Vikings fans. I'm just like, get out of here. I just don't want to talk to you anymore because it's incredibly annoying. So I feel you, Dave.
Yeah, had you guys made a field goal a few years ago, people wouldn't even be talking about Mike Zimmer being on the hot seat. But a kicker misses a field goal, and now they're saying, it's crazy how the head coach and the quarterback just take the blame for everything.
Everything. Yep.
Yeah, I think for me, the big issue will be if they fail again, I think it'll make sense to get rid of the GM. When a GM gets rid of, a head coach can sometimes not be far behind. So even though Nagy has had some good seasons to go with some of the bad seasons and may not be his fault for a lot of the stuff, again, there was always the conversation with Bill O'Brien, is Bill O'Brien the coach actually bad? Is just Bill O'Brien the GM actually bad? Because I would say, you could argue it was fair to fire Bill O'Brien as GM of Houston. Right. He did a terrible job. But as coach, he was actually pretty decent. They performed, I think, above expectations a little, partially because of the decimation he did to his own roster. Again, it's tough in that instance because it's such an intertwined thing with him running both roles. But it's if you got a GM who wanted to work with Nagy, maybe there is no reason to get rid of Nagy, but sometimes these GMs want to bring in their own guys. The ownership just wants a clean sweep. So I think that'll be interesting, but I would agree if they make the playoffs, why not run it back again? All right. Well, I asked Sam about this, so I'll ask you too. How did you start playing fantasy football? What was that first season like? That first draft pick? Do you remember that first draft pick?
Yeah, so I was, playing fantasy football before I was ever actually playing it. My dad was playing fantasy football back before the internet was even a thing. And, his buddies, he was the commissioner of the league. His buddies would call in with their lineups on Sunday mornings. He'd write them all down on some scratch paper. We'd be watching the halftime show and tallying up stats. So that was my introduction to fantasy football as like a 6-year-old kid, and I loved it. And then when I was in junior high in sixth grade, I had a teacher that started us with math baseball, he called it. And right before the season would start, we would pick the players that we want. It was really just a very archaic fantasy baseball league. But for him, it was a way to teach too. He'd bring in the newspapers, and that's how the last 5 minutes of class, we'd go through the box scores, tally up all of our, team's points. And that's how I started playing. The first time I actually did my own fantasy football league, I just destroyed. My dad finally let me in when I was 14 years old, and I just crushed the
Love
league.
it.
The team I had: Donovan McNabb, Sean Alexander, LaDainian Tomlinson, Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, and Tony Gonzalez. All of those guys finished top 3 in their position that year.
I was going to
Wow.
say that is an insane.
How does that
stacked
even
roster.
happen?
If you look at things were weird. I took Donovan McNabb was the first overall pick. Like you didn't have all of the info that you have available now.
Sure.
It's like back in the day, you'd pick quarterbacks because they scored the most points. And now there's so much data and analytics and history and people putting in. But back in the day, you just picked players you liked. It was a lot more informal. So he kicked me out of that league because he thought that I was cheating because I just crushed everybody. So I got one taste of that. And then I went into high school the very next year, commissioned my own league, and I've just been commissioned in that league ever since. So here's the trophy right here. We started in 2009 with the same, but we got 2009 all the way up to this year with everyone's names on there. So that's the hometown league that we've had going for quite some time. But I've been doing fantasy sports for a long, long time.
Awesome. And it seems like you've been doing the fantasy content for a while as well. How'd you get started in that?
So that was a little bit. Yeah, I've been doing it for a while, but I was doing it anonymously for a while. I was on Reddit, and that's where I got my start, which is the worst place to ever post your content. But I feel like it really kind of sharpened me and made me a better content producer because of that. So I was doing everything anonymous. I was writing full-length articles pretty much and just posting them as a text post on Reddit, the r/fantasy football, and was doing that for a few years. And then somebody from Fantasy Pros reached out to me and they said, "Hey, would you be interested in writing for us?" And I thought I was having a fever dream. I pinched myself. So went on the Fantasy Pros team. And, when I got that email or that DM on Reddit, I thought that I was going to be the next McLateral, and it didn't really work out that way. I started at the absolute bottom doing NBA game recaps and injury reports.
Right.
So did that for about a year. Was kind of slowly climbing my way up in Fantasy Pros. And then in August, Adam Koffler, one of my buddies from Fantasy Pros, he said, "Hey, why aren't you on Twitter?" He's like, "You need to get out on Twitter, start marketing yourself, sharing your content." So I hopped on Twitter in August, got hooked up with Elvin Ryan and started writing some articles for his website, then started doing some podcasts in December, and just have been kind of running with it ever since.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's great stuff. Do you have any advice for those aside from not posting anonymously on Reddit necessarily? Because it seems like you're fairly anti that. You're like, maybe work for me, but maybe not what I'd recommend. What other advice do you have for those getting into content creation in the fantasy space?
I've got a lot of advice. The biggest one would just be to avoid the drama. There's so much drama. Like every single day, you've got people just going at each other's throats and attacking each other's companies and attacking each other's brands. And as somebody who works with a lot of, the higher ups over at Fantasy Pros and football guys, they see everything. Like you think that you're out here just, having a little argument between two people, but you don't understand that people with big eyes are noticing that. And I can tell you from, firsthand conversations that these people that are drama starters are getting blacklisted by the big companies, and they're not going to get their breaks because people don't want to work with people like that. So avoid drama, be positive, help build people up. And that was one of the biggest things for me is I did get some help when I started in the industry. Working at Fantasy Pros, I had some of those connections. And I reached out to McLateral with one of the first articles that I wrote. And I sent it over to him and I said, "Hey, man, would you mind looking over this for me? It would really mean a lot to get feedback from somebody like you." And I saw that he read the message and then didn't respond to me. So I was just like, yeah, well, whatever. That's kind of what I expected. And then the next day, he gives me this huge breakdown, like went through everything and just, hey, I like this. I don't like this. Maybe try to make the point a little bit clearer by doing this. And I was just blown away that, like, at the time I had 150 Twitter followers, and Mike Tagliere is taking like an hour out of his day to like really critique one of my articles. So that's something I say this all the time. If you're ever looking for feedback, I don't have time to watch 20 shows a day. So I'm not going to be able to give feedback on shows. But if you've got an article that you want to look over, send it my way. I'm more than happy to look through it. And I'm not just going to pat you on the back and tell you did a good job. I'm going to give you constructive and critical feedback, because that's what helps people get better. So many people are just willing to say, hey, you're doing a great job, even when the content sucks. And I don't think that's beneficial to anybody. It makes you look like a fraud for promoting somebody who isn't doing well, and it doesn't help the person get better. So I'm going to give you constructive feedback, because that was what was critical in helping me kind of, polish my skill set a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense. And I would also agree that it's like, if I'm reaching out to someone like you, someone that works with a professional operation, like, I'm wasting the opportunity if I'm not trying to get some constructive feedback. Like, unless it turns out I'm really that good, which, trust me, I'm not. You're not. Like, it's like there's always somehow some room for improvement. Like, I think even Mike Tagliere would say that, like, he guarantees that somewhere in his stuff, which is the cream of the crop to the rest of us out here, he would be like, there's X, Y, Z where I can do better. Like, I just know it.
And I caught it once. I was scrolling through Fantasy Pros, reading up once, and I caught a typo, and it was like, I was so happy. I sent it to Mike right away, and I was like, "Hey, Mike, man, I found a typo. You better get this fixed ASAP."
that is
taking your opportunity to just like cut off his legs or something.
Well, I mean, that was worth it just to bring you on for that. I mean, that's all the time we have, guys. Now, we still got plenty more to get into, including picking wide receivers. Talked a little about 0 wide receivers, so I figured we'd talk about some wide receivers first and then go into why you shouldn't draft them right away. What is your process for finding some value picks at wide receiver?
My process is pretty simple. I look for guys that either had a lot of targets in the previous season and underperformed, or are in a position to see increased targets the following season. So there's always these weird market inadequacies that I can't wrap my head around. So I'll just highlight 2 of them right now. The first being Robbie Anderson. He out-targeted DJ Moore last season. He's got a rapport with Sam Darnold. I don't understand why Robbie Anderson is getting drafted 3 rounds behind DJ Moore. I understand that DJ Moore has the intangibles and, the measurements, and he definitely has a sky-high ceiling, but we already saw it last year. Robbie Anderson is the focal point of that offense. So I would much rather wait 3 rounds to get Robbie Anderson than to reach for somebody like DJ Moore.
And I'm going to interject there as a former Temple alum. Matt Rule was Robbie Anderson's head coach. Like,
thank you. Yes.
There is no one on that roster, including CMC, that Matt Rule wanted there more than Robbie Anderson. I'm not saying that Robbie Anderson's better than CMC. Like, please, leave the hate out of my DMs, I swear. But Matt Rule wants Robbie Anderson there so bad, and he is going to utilize him. So I 1,000% agree.
I was saying it last offseason. I can't remember exactly what the contract was, but everyone was hyping up DJ Moore, and I think it was $40 million or something. Whatever it was, he got a big contract. And I said, no team pays a player this much money unless they want him to be the focal point of the offense. And sure enough, he was. And now we're heading into next year, and people still can't wrap their minds around it. So that's what I like to look for is, the guy that's getting the targets. Those are the guys that are going to give you a safe floor every single week.
Yeah. That makes sense. Sam, you seem like you had something
you want to add. I'm waiting to see what Sam says.
Well, I was going to say, just because they're using Robbie Anderson in the primary role doesn't mean it's right, but it is happening.
Right.
Because like if I were them, I would have used DJ Moore in that role and put Robbie Anderson in the role they put DJ Moore in. Like, as far as their skill set goes, it didn't really make sense to me, but I'm not the coach. So, if Robbie Anderson's getting most of the targets, like, that's kind of what we have to watch there. So I agree with that.
I think a lot of the people are just overthinking it for that reason. Right. And it does make sense. Like, you'd think that DJ Moore should be the guy going across the middle, making those contested catches while Robbie Anderson is flying down the sideline, but they didn't play it that way last year. And people are expecting just this, fundamental shift in how the Panthers are playing their game. But I just don't see it happening. The other big inadequacy that I see right now, and I'm going to catch a lot of hate for this, I know it, but last year, Tyler Lockett out-targeted DK Metcalf. And right now, DK Metcalf is the third receiver going off the board. Tyler Lockett's getting dropped into the 6th and 7th round. Obviously, DK Metcalf's ceiling is significantly higher than Tyler Lockett's. I'm not trying to say that Tyler Lockett is going to outperform DK Metcalf, but why would you spend a late first, early second round pick on somebody who's going to be just as involved in the offense as Tyler Lockett is, somebody that can be had in the same tier as, Damian Williams?
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely all valid.
Yeah, 100%. What are your thoughts on Deontay Johnson? Because I feel like he might fall in a similar, thing that you're looking for. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I just put him on my list. I did a list yesterday of, the favorite mid to late round wide receiver targets for me, and Deontay Johnson. Yeah, he was on that list. I'm a big fan of him. People are starting to write him off because of the drops, but we see this all the time. Drops, fumbles, they suck, they get coaches mad, but they're also very sporadic and tough to predict. We saw this 2 years ago with Chris Carson. He coughed up the ball for a few games, and people are still giving him grief about it. Like that guy is going to finish as a top 10 running back in 2020, make no doubt about it. But people are still worried about his fumbling from a few years ago. People and I don't think it's going to happen. He gets the most separation, he gets the most targets. And I understand that wide receiver core is crowded with Juju Smith-Schuster coming back there, Chase Claypool emerging. But Deontay Johnson is the guy that can easily see 150, 160 targets next year.
Dude, he got 140. He got 140 targets with both of them there. Like, why would that change? And he was hurt for a lot of, he was banged up a lot of the season. So I agree.
So I love Deontay Johnson. Yeah. He's a guy that I would be very, very comfortable taking as my wide receiver 1 on a running back heavy draft.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that's changing about that offense is now the running back is Kalen Ballage. So the run game will be a little bit better this year than it was last year. Kalen Ballage to the moon.
Don't remind me.
Trust me.
Honestly, do we want to talk about Kalen Ballage? Because I like Kalen Ballage.
We can talk about Kalen Ballage. I'm here for it. I give us an hour-ish for a reason. Let's go.
We should talk about Kalen Ballage because I know for a fact that Herms is listening. So, and I can't imagine he feels great about that. So this would be great.
So we see this all the time. We see good running backs in Pittsburgh go to another team and not be so good. They've got a great run scheme there. They always, invest in their offensive line. And Kalen Ballage hasn't really had a good offensive line his entire career. So I think that, or a coach, yeah. And now he goes to one of the strongest organizations with a great coach, a decent offensive line. And, everybody loves to poke fun at that. What was it? 2.1 yards per carry, something like that in his Miami days. But he's a beast. He's 6'3" or something like that. He's just a freaking monster. I think that he is going to fare just fine in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I could genuinely. It's like, if they draft someone, will it shock me? No. If they draft Najee Harris, will it shock me? Maybe a little. I could see them taking someone more as a complementary piece. I think Kalen Ballage will be involved in that offense in some way. They didn't bring him in for no reason. Whether he's
what was the contract he signed?
You're gonna put me on the spot.
I usually care about contracts a little bit at least.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I totally get that. That's why I'm actually not so hyped on James Conner, because he only got paid $1.5 million.
It's backup money.
Yeah, well, man. Comparatively, Kalen Ballage, $920,000. So,
oh god,
yeah, that's pretty brutal.
What you will, but
let's tie that back to the David Montgomery. Tariq Cohen is the 15th highest paid running back in the NFL, so they're going to be getting him used next year. So remember that, David Montgomery stands.
David Montgomery will not be an RB1 next year. There is not enough to go around on that offense, and they will use Tariq Cohen. They want to use Tariq Cohen. That's why they didn't trade Tariq Cohen for Carson Wentz, which was apparently a thing that existed on Twitter for a hot second. I totally agree there.
Something I wanted to say, I would say before we move on, something I wanted to say about the David Montgomery situation was something I like to think about a lot, just I guess conceptually, is that I feel like oftentimes great situations can make average players look great. And I feel like David Montgomery was in that situation last year. And I think people like to compare it to Jonathan Taylor, but because it was very similar. But I'm just like, anyone who thinks that David Montgomery is as good as Jonathan Taylor is kidding themselves, you know. And so like, people should definitely expect him to dip for David Montgomery.
Jonathan Taylor did his thing with Naheem Hines still on the roster.
Yeah,
like there was no Naheem Hines in Chicago,
which is Tariq
Cohen barely produced. We didn't even get Tariq Cohen. He was out the whole season.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
Like,
now he'll coming back. Yeah.
Tariq Cohen, like, he's going to get a lot of usage in that offense. You could get Naheem Hines level usage. I don't think he'll get Naheem Hines level fantasy points, but that's a whole different conversation. And another different conversation is you landed on DK Metcalf in 2020. How did you get there? What was your thought process hitting that pick?
The shirtless picture of it, man. That I was sold after I saw that. How good
you and Pete Carroll, man.
No, but really, you know, I like to claim that DK Metcalf was one of my biggest wins from 2020. But I was advocating to take DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. No one was really sure who that wide receiver one was going to be. And well, you know, it obviously ended up being Metcalf. It was really more of a wide receiver 1 A and B situation than like a clear cut 1 and 2. So Metcalf finishes the wide receiver 7, but that was that red hot finish that he had. You know, he was wide receiver 2 for the first half of the year. He was wide receiver 39 for the second half of the year. And a lot of people just don't really like to talk about that much. So overall in the season, you know, he finished well. But really, you know, I was advocating to take both of those guys for the sole reason that Russell Wilson has almost always produced a wide receiver 1, and there weren't a lot of people on there. I knew it wasn't going to be, you know, who else was even there? David Moore. You know, it had to be either Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf. Both of those guys were getting drafted in the 6th round. So pretty much every draft I was going into, I was taking one of those guys to be my wide receiver 1. And unfortunately, it ended up being a pretty bad year for me because those guys did not finish the season too hot. So you know, a lot of my teams last year got off to a blazing hot start and then kind of died with the Seattle Seahawks.
I saw the stat somewhere. It was like David Moore was the 3rd most targeted player on the team, and he had like 45 targets. And that was it.
Yeah, I mean, it was the DK Metcalf
insane.
and Tyler Lockett show. That was it in Seattle. There was nobody else getting involved.
Yeah, then, you know, someone else who didn't quite get as involved as we would like to in 2020 was Mike Williams, who I think you're officially out on. Finally, you're willing to commit to.
I said that the other day.
Is he? Is he really?
Yeah. How do you quit a guy that's 6'4", blazing speed, can jump out of the stadium, and is tied to one of the best young?
Because when he jumps out of the stadium, he lands on something and breaks something.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
Every time.
One of my favorite things, and I highlighted this in an article I wrote last year, but NFL on their Twitter page, they came out with a Phillip Rivers best plays of 2019. So this came out last offseason. 8 of those top 10 plays were Mike Williams adjusting and making some crazy acrobatic catch, like doing a backflip as he's coming down with the ball. And that was Phillip Rivers' highlight reel from 2019.
The talent's there. I don't think there actually is anyone of any reputable status that doesn't think the talent is there. Nobody is out there going, Mike Williams is not a good wide receiver, but he just cannot stay healthy. And I think that's really what it's come down to. And there's no reason to expect him to magically stay healthy in 2021.
So here, I'll tell you guys this secretly. I'm not going to be advocating that everybody else go out and burn or get Mike Williams because he's burned people for the last couple of years now. But me, secretly, I'm going to have a lot of Mike Williams shares next year.
Fair enough. Is there anyone you're concerned in 2021? It doesn't have to be at wide receiver necessarily, though. If you got one, great. That you can see being the 2021 version of Mike Williams. Like you go in, you go, this guy's talented. There's no reason this shouldn't work. And then there's that reason that we always should have thought of where, oh yeah, this is why it doesn't work.
Yeah. And, you know, I was kind of thinking about that because there aren't many players that, you know, get drafted with that sort of capital and show these flashes of greatness and just can't really put it together consecutively over a career. So I feel like Mike Williams really is an outlier with like the trajectory and the flashes and everything that we've seen. It's a very weird situation. But I was trying to think of another 4th-year receiver that everybody just keeps, you know, beating the drum every single year saying this is going to be the year, and he just keeps letting people down. And for me, I think that would be Christian Kirk.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Yes, and Christian Kirk is the one guy that I could think of. It's just it's frustrating to see. He's got so much talent, but I'm afraid that he's going to end up getting overshadowed by Andy Isabella. And now you've got AJ Green in there, which, I mean, AJ Green looked awful last year, but he's still there. It's another warm body. So I don't really know what to expect from Christian Kirk, but after being on that hype train for the last 2 years, I think I'm going to be staying away from Christian Kirk this year.
I would agree. I was a Christian Kirk fan as well. There's talk that they might even draft a wide receiver, and I'm just like, I'm
Dude,
out.
I just said today, I'm like, what would Elijah Moore look like in that offense? I feel like that'd be pretty fun, and that would probably make Christian Kirk, obsolete at that point.
Yeah, I'm afraid that Andy Isabella has already jumped above him on the depth chart, and
That's interesting.
But I mean, we've seen Christian Kirk, like he's almost kind of similar to Tyler Lockett, if you will. Like he has these games where he just blows up, and it's like, yes,
Right.
we're finally seeing it. And then the next week, it's like 2 targets and nothing.
Right. Yep.
I think Kirk is better than Isabella, but I would agree with Dave. Actually, I think that team values Isabella more. I think we saw some flashes of it last year.
Yeah.
And I'll be curious to see what happens this year. And luckily, I think I'll be curious holding 0 shares of either guy, which works for me. All right. 0 wide receiver. The topic that's taken up most of the brain power of this evening. Dave, you are a big 0 wide receiver guy. Sam's a big 0 wide receiver guy. We've already heard why Sam is a big 0 wide receiver guy. But why are you a big 0 wide receiver guy?
Well, first of all, I feel like it would be remiss not to plug my article that's coming out tomorrow morning for Football Guys that is going to be titled 0 Wide Receiver Drafting and Players to Target, where what I'm going to do is the beginning is just a full intro on why, and it's got tons of stats and data to back it up. And it's an article that I wrote a few years back, and it seems like every single year I polish it up with last year's data, and it just becomes more and more obvious that this is the way to go. So, simply put, bell cow running backs are just a dying breed. 10 years ago, it seemed like every team had a running back that was going to see 200 carries minimum. Now coaches are starting to lean towards these frustrating committees, and it's just been a nightmare for fantasy managers. So in addition to these running back by committees becoming more popular, the league is also starting to pass more, which means that wide receivers are a lot deeper. So I looked at this the other day, and I pulled this in my article. But when you're looking at running backs and wide receivers that are both scoring 20 plus, last year there were 3 of each, and I don't have the names off the top of my head, but there were 3 running backs and 3 wide receivers that averaged 20 points per game. Once you get to 15 points per game, there were 14 running backs and 19 wide receivers. So that's when you start to see a little bit of a discrepancy. And then once you hit that 10 to 15 point range, there were 60 wide receivers that hit that point and only 36 running backs. So the amount of wide receivers that you can draft late that are still going to be serviceable week to week is just so much deeper. And then another big thing, and I heard you guys talking about this a little bit, and I've got the numbers to back this up as well, but the fall off after you the fall off between an RB1 and an RB2 is so much bigger than the fall off between a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2. So I didn't want to do just the top of the position and go down because, Devontae Adams, Christian McCaffrey's points per game really skewed that data a little bit. So what I did was I took the top 3 in each position and looked at the average and then looked at the gap between those top 3 players and the 20th player at their position. So the gap for running backs was 12.7 points. So if you take the, 3 top running backs and then the drop down to RB20, which is Mike Davis, you're looking at almost a 13-point gap there. That same gap for wide receivers, which funny enough, the wide receiver 20 was Deontay Johnson, but that gap was just 8 points. So you're looking at this huge fall off once you get into it. So I feel like there's so much to be said about drafting those running backs early. So the only way that I'll really stray from taking a running back early is if you can get one of those big tight ends. If Kittle is still sitting there mid-second, if Kelsey's mid-second, if Kittle and Waller are still there in the early third, then I'd stray away from it. But really what I'm doing is ranking my running backs, and I'm just smashing the top running back available for the first 3 rounds when I draft.
Yep, there are worse ideas. I've done
Preach.
I've done it before. I had one season where I managed to win a championship, and I think my fourth best running back on the team was Chris Carson. And it was just because I drafted running back after running back after running back, and I got Aaron Jones super late, which was nice.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And another big thing, and I forgot to even mention this, but last year, 5 of the top 10 wide receivers were drafted in the 5th round or later. So when you look at it, Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, all of those guys had an ADP outside of the 4th round and finished as top 10 wide receivers. So there's those guys this year that are still going out there. Cortland Sutton, Robbie Anderson, Laviska Shenault, Michael Pittman. These guys are guys that you can get late in your draft that really hold wide receiver 1 upside.
Well, let's talk about one of those guys right now. Curtis Samuel doesn't have wide receiver 1 upside. What is his outlook for 2021? Gentlemen, you have the floor.
Sam, you start this one off. I know you're a huge Curtis Samuel fan.
Yeah, well, he's like the only player that I feel like I don't have a jersey from Curtis Samuel yet, and I don't know why. Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, if I had to like look back at all the tweets that I've tweeted about Curtis Samuel, I'm sure it's like something like 20%, some ridiculous number, 20% or something. But honestly, so just to preface, like Curtis Samuel for the last 10 games was wide receiver 12. So that's a significant amount of time in the season. So do I think he has wide receiver 1 upside? Kind of. I don't think he has top 5 in his range of outcomes, but I do think that if it hits right, Curtis Samuel can be like a back end wide receiver 1. But I think, realistically, he could easily hit wide receiver 2 numbers. I mean, he was this year. He finished at, I think, wide receiver 22. And I think the real question that's kind of like floating around is like, was this last year Curtis Samuel's ceiling? And I absolutely do not think so. And here's why. So his first 2 seasons, he suffered through injuries for the first season. And also, to actually backtrack even more, Curtis Samuel was never truly a wide receiver in college. So he's been transitioning, trying to be a full-time wide receiver through the NFL. So injuries first year, also injuries the second year. They drafted DJ Moore, so they had similar experience. The third year, he had half of Cam Newton and Kyle Allen throwing to him. He had like a 50% catch rate at that point. It was just horrible. He was like Darnell Mooney, right? You just see overthrows left and right. So Curtis Samuel's like, man, if you just give him the ball, he's gonna make it happen. And then you get this last year, and what do? They go sign Robbie Anderson. And it's like, dude, you were just setting up Curtis Samuel to fail, honestly. But guess what? He didn't. He actually produced for the last 10 weeks and was a back-end wide receiver 1. So I just don't see why him going to Washington with, I think, arguably the best quarterback he will have throwing to him in a situation that he's only really competing with targets with Terry McLaurin and Logan Thomas. I could easily see J.D. McKissick. I don't know.
Yeah, but Ryan Fitzpatrick doesn't throw to running backs.
I don't think so.
Ends.
Right? Yeah.
He doesn't, and I think he will throw. I think J.D. McKissick will be less involved this year.
Right, and I think J.D. McKissick was mostly just a product of the lack of targets they had. They were throwing to Cam Sims and Steven Sims, and I don't even remember who else was there. Some other people, I guess, that we don't remember, but. Last year, wide receiver 13 on the year was Robert Woods. He put up 950 yards, 8 touchdowns with like 200 or 150 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. What's to say Curtis Samuel can't do that this year? I'm not saying that's actually, wide receiver 13, but I think that pretty easily could happen for Curtis Samuel. So I'm going to stop talking. I could talk all day about Curtis Samuel. Dave, let's see what you have.
Yeah, man, I love Curtis Samuel too, and I think that he is going to continue the production that we saw last year. I'm not quite as high as you are on him, Sam. I've got him sitting at wide receiver 18 right now. Yeah. I think the biggest thing that Curtis Samuel does is just shoot an arrow right through Terry McLaurin's knee. And I hate to say it because I love Terry McLaurin. I'm a huge Terry McLaurin fan. And when Ryan Fitzpatrick signed with Washington, I was screaming from the rooftop that Terry McLaurin was going to be a top 3 wide receiver. And then they just went out and grabbed one of my absolute favorite wide receivers in Curtis Samuel. So you already talked about it. Injuries have really screwed up the beginning of Curtis Samuel's career, but he still totaled over 200 targets in a very crowded offense with, Christian McCaffrey, Robbie Anderson last year, DJ Moore the last 2 years. He still commanded 200 total targets. So Terry McLaurin was an absolute beast last year. He saw 134 targets. every other wide receiver on the Washington team combined for 162 targets. So Terry McLaurin himself was almost outproducing the entire team.
Yeah.
He was number one in air yard share. He was number one in target share. And now Curtis Samuel is going to come in, and he is a great separator. He's going to get open, and he's going to command targets and really, really throw a wrench in Terry McLaurin's value. The one thing that really jumped out to me, though, from the 2020 season is Curtis Samuel. You know, he gets labeled as this gadgety player, but last year he was getting downfield and making plays and still finished second in catch rate in the entire NFL. So if he's able to develop that early rapport with Ryan Fitzpatrick and earn his trust, Curtis Samuel could easily finish as a low-end wide receiver 1.
Right. And some people get weary about, wide receivers changing teams. But the thing is he's going to a team with his previous coach and offensive coordinator, if I'm correct. So he knows the system, and I watched the video where he was just like, there's going to be a few wrinkles that I'll have to learn. But for the most part, I know their system. So I don't think he's going to have to do much learning. So he's just going to hop right in and go. And I would like to preface too, I don't think he's actually going to be a wide receiver 1. I definitely think it's more likely that Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel finish in like the, 12 to 20 range together than like any of those two hitting wide receiver 1 numbers. I just think they're both going to be wide receiver 2s.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I think Terry's going to be flirting with wide receiver 10. I think bringing in Samuel actually forces teams to be a little more honest about the wide receivers. I think Fitzpatrick's style is going to cater a little more towards Terry than it will to Samuel. I think there's one really interesting thing to bring up with Samuel. In 2019, his target quality rating was 101st in the league. His catchable target rate was 105th in the league. His catch rate was 101st in the league. And you go to 2020, we're talking about an upgrade in quarterback, I guess, it turned out, because his target quality rating, like, it doubled. He's now 54th in the league instead of 100 and change. His catchable target rate was 8th in the league.
That's nice.
I worry about Ryan Fitzpatrick's ability to replicate those numbers based on what I saw in Miami last year. Granted, he could still not replicate that and then still be significantly better than Cam Newton was and Kyle Allen were in 2019, and it'll still totally work out for Curtis Samuel. It's just like, it's the one thing I'm still evaluating where it's just like, what is this more indicative of? Is it more indicative of how Carolina's system worked last year, how the quality improved at quarterback, or is it we finally got Curtis Samuel firing on all cylinders and he added to that increase in quality of target? Because again, his target quality increased, but he was still like in the 50s, but then his like catch rate is like top 10. So to me, that does indicate that the player is involved at least to some degree. Like that can't all be, it just literally can't. Like there's no way the logic makes sense where that's all the quarterback, all the system. Like that has to be some of the talent. What about Dynasty? Where are you guys ranking him there? What are you guys thinking? Like who are you trading to get a Curtis Samuel? Dave, I want to start with you.
I'm somebody who my process in Dynasty is I really don't make changes based off of transactions unless it's a really long-term deal. So I try to really base my Dynasty rankings off of talent because so many things can change year to year. Quarterbacks can get shuffled around. So this move for me doesn't really change him at all. I had him in the low 20s before the move, and it's really tough for me to see this move. I mean, if he moved to Aaron Rodgers, like if he signed a 5-year deal to go to Green Bay and was going to be locked in with Aaron Rodgers for the next year, sure, I'd move him up a couple spots then, but I don't think that the move from Carolina to Washington really does too much for his long-term value. And I think that he's still young enough that he'll still get, another decent contract for another team at some point in his career.
That's all fair. Sam, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, his contract's going to be up and he'll be 27. Like that's younger than Devontae Adams or DeAndre Hopkins, or similar age at least. But I agree, though. It hasn't really changed for me as well, because I like to just try as much as I can, push out the situation, even though it absolutely does matter, at least in the current moment. Situation matters for a player, but definitely talent. And I I don't know. I haven't done much rankings, so it's hard for me to conceptualize where I would put him. But, I've liked him for a long time, and he's going into his prime years. He just signed a 3-year contract. Like, I think if there's a time to buy him, it's find someone who doesn't like him and thinks last year was his ceiling and take it from him. That's easy money right there. He's someone that you can draft as a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3 right now, at the highest. And you could easily get wide receiver 2 numbers out of him. So yeah, love Curtis Samuel.
Okay. I'm reactive to a fault when it comes to my redraft rankings. Like,
right.
I can I'll be watching a Instagram video and I see somebody like bump his foot on a chair and I'm like, all right, time to drop him. His season's over.
Get out of here.
I'm so reactive when it comes to redraft, but I try to be very, level-headed and keep my dynasty rankings, pretty intact during the offseason.
Right.
So for redraft, has Rojo stopped falling yet, or is he still going down?
I mean, he is just all season been up and down. Yeah, I was just on a pod with Jeremy Layton a couple days ago, and we were talking about the Tampa Bay backfield. I just said, man, I can't play this game anymore. I cannot play the Bruce Arians backfield game. In 2019, I was convinced that it was going to be Ronald Jones. I was telling everyone to get Ronald Jones. I had Ronald Jones on all my teams, and it was Peyton Barber. And then last year, I'm like, all right, they've got Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette's going to be the guy. You can find it. I've got plenty of Leonard Fournette RB1 receipts from last offseason, and it was Ronald Jones. So if we're following this trend, I'm going to hop on the Rojo train this season, and it's going to be Keyshawn Vaughn finishing it as an RB1.
How crazy would that be? Keyshawn Vaughn ends up being the RB1.
So here's the thing with that. Bruce Arians has specifically said to expect a breakout year from Keyshawn Vaughn. So we should all be surprised if Keyshawn Vaughn's still on the roster.
I can't hear it. I've played this game too long. Bruce Arians has just screwed me my entire fantasy football career.
In my time as a fantasy analyst, fantasy writer, et cetera, there's been one take I have been consistent with my entire time. There are receipts out there. You can find them. And that is that Bruce Arians is a dirty, filthy liar. I've said it once. I've said it again. The man will never hire me for anything. I don't care. He's a dirty, filthy liar, and you should never trust a word he says. And if you don't trust him, you will be better off for it.
And the thing,
I guarantee it.
In 2016, he tricked us too. It was like, holy cow, like Bruce Arians is going to find a running back, which was David Johnson that year. And we were like, and this is what he's going to do. He's going to revolve an entire offense around a running back. He's going to throw to him. He's going to hand the ball off to him. And everyone said, like, Bruce Arians is a fantasy football running back god. And then the very next year, he just pulled the rug out from under us and has just been playing mind games ever since.
I don't know that it's literally happened ever again. Like,
ever.
He is a dirty, filthy liar.
Every year, 2017, 18, 19, and 20, all he has done, like, I purposely think that he tries to, like, I think that he hates fantasy football, and that's his thing. Like, in his mind, he's like, I'm going to start Ronald Jones this week, but then he just gets on a podium and says, oh yeah, Leonard Fournette's our guy, and then just goes and laughs to himself backstage.
I feel like Bruce Arians probably just really sucked at fantasy football for a while and just got really mad, and so now he just has this like grudge against it, so.
Well, we'll keep it on risers and fallers. So for redraft, Dave, who's your biggest redraft wide receiver riser and your biggest redraft wide receiver faller?
The biggest riser for me, and this is going to be a lukewarm take that you've heard a million people say already, but why not just hit it on the show? AJ Brown is on a team that has so many vacated targets, with Jonnu Smith being gone, with Corey Davis being gone. AJ Brown is going to feast. We might see him see 200 plus targets this year. I mean, it is going to be absolutely bonkers for AJ Brown in Tennessee. The way this offseason is shaken out, I don't think there's anybody that has seen a more meteoric rise than AJ Brown has.
Have they named an offensive coordinator yet? I'm genuinely asking.
Yeah, AJ Brown, he's calling the plays too. He's doing everything in Tennessee.
That's my only concern with AJ Brown. He's talented enough. He's got a rapport with the quarterback. There's tons of vacated targets. If you draft him to be a wide receiver one, honestly, the chances are you're probably going to be fine. I just think like I am a little concerned about who's calling the plays.
I just
literally don't know who's calling the plays.
Yeah.
Neither do I. But he, cream rises to the top, and that dude is
so good.
Good. Again, not disagreeing with literally any of that.
AJ Brown to the moon.
So faller though, who's your biggest after these free agent moves? Who's your biggest faller in the wide receiver space?
I mean, we already talked about it, but Terry McLaurin. I feel like,
Really?
a
Okay.
lot of people, and not falling necessarily from his production last season, but falling from the Ryan Fitzpatrick signing hype to where he's at right now with Curtis Samuel joining that wide receiver core. I think that he falls off quite a bit.
Okay, I would say that's fair, putting it in a much more recent context. Because I would say if you took over, for the audio listeners, sorry, that was a visual only moment there.
The lateral bot just breaking Malcolm.
Oh man! So for context, the Titans' offensive coordinator was the guy from Oakland who split targets between Crabtree and Amari, and it was the one year where we hated everything. So luckily, there's no one to split targets with, so we'll be fine.
Josh Reynolds, come
on. Back to what I was saying though. I would say McLaurin overall in free agency has trended up because he's actually got a quarterback potentially now. But yes, I would say with the addition of Curtis Samuel, there is certainly an argument to be made, and I think you've made it very eloquently, that his stock should fall.
So on the show sheet, I didn't know we were talking strictly wide receivers. When you said biggest faller, what I wrote was Jonnu Smith. So okay. I'm shooting from the hip with the Terry McLaurin.
Speaking of that,
Jonnu Smith is the biggest faller. So right after I'm sitting here hyping up AJ Brown for being the one guy, Jonnu Smith, I think that he is just looking at a terrible situation in New England, and everyone has him pegged as this like working his way up into that Travis Kelce tier, and I just do not see it at all. First of all, Hunter Henry is obviously there, and I think Hunter Henry is the better pass catcher out of the two of them. A lot of people love to pull up this quote from Bill Belichick from a few years ago where it was Bill Belichick gushing over Jonnu Smith. But you know what he said before talking about his pass catching ability and before talking about his running ability? He talked about his ability as a run blocker. So they've already committed to Cam Newton to come back. They've spent the draft stock on Sony Michel. They've got Damian Harris now. I'm not saying Sony Michel is good. I'm just using that as an argument that the Patriots want to be committed to the run. So I think that this is going to be a very run-heavy team, and I think that you're going to see Jonnu running out there as the lead blocker a lot. Last year, Cam Newton threw a total of 8 touches. Are we really expecting that number to go up that much? So you've got 3 new wide receivers that they brought in. You've got 2 new tight ends that they brought in. I think that it's going to be a very run-heavy approach, and I don't think that that offense is going to be able to support multiple fantasy options as pass catchers. So I'm completely off on Jonnu. Everybody hyping him up as a tight end 1. Go ahead, draft him. I'm not even going to be thinking about taking him in a single league.
Yeah, I totally agree. I actually wrote about it for the Lateral in our free agent losers column, and the data is just not there. The Patriots, like their market share to tight ends has only been going down. They basically have had 2 instances. It was the one Hernandez and Gronk year, and then like the Martellus Bennett year. Actually, when both him and Gronk were healthy, they hit around the 30% target share, but Aguilar's come in like they're clearly focusing on wide receiver. Like there's so much to go around. And I would agree with you that I not only think Henry's the better pass catcher, I think Jonnu's the better blocker. It makes sense. And their contracts aren't so vastly different that they're going to be incentivized by the money to use one in a particularly way compared to the other. Like they have brought in to do whatever Belichick's purpose is for them. And I don't think it actually results in either of them being a tight end 1.
Yep.
Full stop. Sam, biggest, just in general, redraft riser and biggest faller. We'll throw away that wide receiver tag.
It's funny because I also interpreted this in a different way where I was like, I read it as like, oh, who's risen the most from consensus? I was like, oh, Cam Akers or Terry McLaurin. But if I had to pick someone that has been rising at my board, I think I kind of said it earlier, man. I'm all in on Zeke again this year. Like, just give me Zeke every time. I think an obvious faller would be Deshaun Watson. Obviously, with that, I think it's interesting to at least talk about whether we actually think he's going to play this year. There's still a lot of information to come out on Deshaun Watson, so it's hard to make any snap judgments about that. But someone that I think has been falling that I would be higher on is Michael Thomas. I think his ADP is way too low right now. It's just weird. Like we're definitely overcorrecting for a season that was riddled by injuries, some questionable quarterback play, but between Drew Brees being in his last year and Taysom Hill. I know Taysom Hill actually technically was pretty good based on completion percentage, but I just think overall it wasn't a great situation for Michael Thomas to truly succeed. So I think that's someone that I'm rising up my board probably the most. I still think he can be a solid third round pick.
Okay, and then for Dynasty, I know, Dave, you said that you base your rankings a lot around talent, so free agency maybe didn't change things that much, but is there anyone that, since free agency is come and gone for the most part, that is rising or falling on your board when it comes to Dynasty? Who?
Aaron Jones and Chris Carson. And I know that sounds weird to say, but they were two guys that were going to be free agents, and there were going to be a lot of question marks. If Aaron Jones went to Miami, if Chris Carson went to Buffalo, sure, those could have been good opportunities for him. But I didn't know where they were going to go. So I slid them down my rankings a little bit just because of the questions that were surrounding them. But now with Aaron Jones going back to the Packers, Chris Carson going back to Seattle, these guys have proven success in an offense that works for them. Aaron Jones just is going to almost be a lock for a top 5 running back again this year. Chris Carson, a lot of people have questions about Rashad Penny, and they have questions about his fumbling and injuries and whatever it may be. And those are real concerns to have. But at the end of the day, he is the best running back on that team by a landslide. And I'm hoping that, we've seen somewhat of a timeshare, whether it's Rashad Penny, Carlos Hyde, whoever it may be. He's always seems to be splitting touches with somebody. But now that he's got the paycheck, I'm hoping that they commit to him a little bit more. He's done nothing but earn that role as the starting running back in Seattle. So those are the two guys that immediately, once they signed their contracts, they shot up my dynasty rankings.
Yep. I definitely agree, especially with Carson. I think Seattle was the best landing spot for him.
100%.
Anywhere he was going to go, he was going to be used in a committee, unless there was the Atlanta rumors where maybe he could be used as a bell cow. But I think because Atlanta maybe wants a bell cow is precisely why they didn't go for Chris Carson. I think Miami would have been interesting for Jones, but it's tough to argue with Green Bay, where he's gotten results year after year. Sam, what about you? Biggest dynasty risers and fallers in this post-free agency world we live in?
Yeah. Man, I feel like Deontay Johnson, I know we already kind of talked about him, but he's someone that I feel like keeps just rising at my board the more I look into him, just because those targets, man, are just hard to come by. And he's someone that obviously was earning targets, even with Juju and Chase Claypool around. I know they re-signed Juju, but I feel like, it doesn't matter to me because I think Juju still will be gone next year. And that's just going to leave Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson to absolutely feast. And who knows who ends up being the quarterback, but I don't think it really matters. He's just a really talented player. Like you said, I just, I want to chase that talent. It's just someone that I wasn't super aware of because of his draft capital. And I just kind of didn't really look into him until later in the season and this offseason. So he's someone that's been rising at my boards a lot. And I guess a big faller, which kind of goes along the Aaron Jones line, is AJ Dillon. I do think it's it's funny because I actually wrote an article about why I thought Aaron Jones was going to be too high, but I think this was probably best case scenario for Aaron Jones was to re-sign with the Packers. However, I do think there might be some overcorrections, and that I do think AJ Dillon is going to have a bigger role than people think. But I think Aaron Jones will he'll be able to get more receiving work because Jamal Williams is gone. So I think AJ Dillon will take more maybe touchdowns, early down work, and then Aaron Jones will just, come in with some more third down work and receiving work. So AJ Dillon is a faller though, for sure, because that 4-year contract is tough on AJ Dillon. So, and I know Dave has some feelings about AJ Dillon too. So,
I was ringing the bell for AJ Dillon being an RB1, and then as soon as I got to stop making takes before free agency is my problem, because I will say in every article that I wrote, I did have a disclaimer in there saying that this is under the assumption that Aaron Jones re-signs somewhere else. But I think the other big faller for me is Jared Goff. And Sam, I'm sure you can attest to this. Being in the NFC North, you've watched the Lions play for a long time. I don't know what it is about that franchise, but they are cursed.
Horrible.
It is just there's something fundamentally wrong with that franchise. And Jared Goff, he was with one of the best coaches in the league. He had Sean McVay. He had a good offensive line, good run game, loaded with pass catching weapons. That was all able to hide the inadequacies of Jared Goff. Now you put him on a team with a garbage defense, no offensive line, Quintez Cephas as his wide receiver one, a brand new coach.
For now.
Now, yeah. They'll assuredly go out and get somebody, but it's going to be a young team in a rebuilding scenario with a coach that we don't know a lot about on a franchise that literally raised a banner for a playoff appearance. It wasn't even a playoff win. They made the playoffs and they raised a banner in the Super. I mean, it's the team is that bad. So Jared Goff, I think that, this is going to be the twilight of his career we're going to see in Detroit.
I can respect that banner raise, though. It just makes me think of when the Caps won the Stanley Cup en route, they beat the Penguins. And it was just like, I think it was the Ringer put up this like joke post, and it was just like, banner. It's like division champs, and then like finally beat the Penguins in a series. I was like, I can respect a banner like that. I really can. It was great. They went on and won the cup that year, so like we got to like just look back and laugh at it. But the little victories matter, and sometimes you get a little victory with a sleeper. Who's your guys' sleeper pick for redraft? Running back, wide receiver, quarterback? I don't care. Just like the guy who you're like, I know I can get this guy late, and I think he's going to be fucking awesome. Dave, I want to hear who it is from you.
Michael Pittman Jr. Right now, he is getting drafted so late, and I love him. And it's one of those where everybody was hyped up with him last year, coming out as a rookie, 6'3", fast. He can kind of do it all, and then failed to live up to lofty expectations. But he was injured. He spent 3 weeks on injured reserve, and not to mention he had a 39-year-old noodle-armed Phillip Rivers throwing the ball to him. I think that Carson Wentz is a huge upgrade from Phillip Rivers, especially behind an elite offensive line. And Michael Pittman, he's going to play his best when he's able to get down the field. So I think that having a bigger arm in Carson Wentz is going to help him out a lot. So he was kind of the people last year that everyone was projecting for this huge breakout, and it didn't happen. So all of those people that were big on Pittman last year, they're going to fall off, and they're going to start looking at all these shiny new toys coming out of the rookie draft this year. I'm going to give Pittman another chance because, it's really tough to get up to NFL speed when you miss the beginning of the season as a rookie. And he showed some flashes down the stretch. So Pittman right now is a guy that I can see easily passing up a 31-year-old T.Y. Hilton to be the primary pass catcher in Indianapolis next year.
Okay. Yeah, I like that one a lot. I think Paris Campbell is someone that a lot of people think will be their sleeper. And so I think that will open up Michael Pittman to a lot of other people. So Sam, you seem to be thinking Paris Campbell. Is there anyone else you're thinking of as well?
Yeah. Well, Paris Campbell was one of my sleepers for Dynasty. I don't know, I guess it would make sense for redraft as well, but I just still like Paris Campbell as a player. And I think he kind of was showing out a lot this year, but for redraft this year, I think it's pretty easy. And I think, sleeper is kind of a broad term these days because there's not really a true sleeper, back in the day. But Brandon Cooks, man, every year he's just freaking good. Like he's just good every year. And he always is underdrafted. Maybe not always, but he is lately,
He is
always underdrafted.
Yeah, that's true. He's probably always underdrafted. And so I don't know, when you're in the, 7th round and Brandon Cooks is still there, just grab him. Just do it. Do it and get over with. Don't overthink it. Brandon Cooks.
Yeah. Okay. I couldn't agree more.
Keeping it simple.
All right. We're going to do a little bit of way too early projections, and then we'll bring what is now over an hour and a half-ish to a close.
Yeah.
Dave, who is your way too early QB1, wide receiver 1, RB1, tight end 1, and then Sam, I'm going to go to you.
I mean, I'm not going to do anything shocking here. For me, it's Mahomes, McCaffrey, Adams, Kelsey. I feel like if I was trying to say anything besides those three,
just taking the chalk, baby.
Yeah, I
think weirdly Mahomes is the spiciest take, just because I don't think we've actually ever seen him quite hit QB1, whereas the other ones we've seen produce those numbers. I earlier in the offseason, I had a take. It was for our dynasty ranking show that we did, and I'm just like, his team is so good that it actually brings down his production ceiling just a little. It's nothing to do with him. If you could just let him rip, he'd probably be QB1, but that team just doesn't need to let him
He doesn't
rip
need to.
Yeah.
Right.
If you want a little spice, I can give you my QB2.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Lamar Jackson at QB2.
Woo!
I'm still on for it, man. The guy's got
Love it.
back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons. Nobody else in NFL history has done that before. That alone is just giving him one of the safest floors in the league. We saw it in the second half of the year. He was just a much better runner in the second half of the year. First half of the year, they tried to keep him in the pocket. It translated to terrible fantasy production. Second half of the year, he was up there with Josh Allen on a per-game basis. So I am 100% back in on Lamar Jackson, and there's a good chance I have 100% exposure on him in redraft leagues next year.
I love it. I love to hear that. Sam, what about you? Who is your way too early QB1, wide receiver 1, RB1, and tight end 1?
My QB1, Dak Prescott, RB1, Saquon, wide receiver, Devontae Adams, tight end 1, George Kittle. I'm going to go with George Kittle. Because here's the thing. I could pick Travis Kelce, but he's got to get dethroned at some point. It's got to happen. It's going to happen at some point. Unless he's just going to keep putting up tight end 1 numbers for the next 6 years, So I think if anyone can do it, it's either going to be Darren Waller or George Kittle. George Kittle is still he is just an absolute animal. And he got hurt a bunch this past year, so I love him. I will say though, AJ Brown is someone that I'm flirting with putting it, as a sleeper for wide receiver 1, because I'm all in with you, Dave. I think he's so good.
He's my dynasty wide receiver 1, but yeah, I think if you're going redraft,
it's hard
right now, the big thing with Devontae Adams that blew my mind, he's been top 2 in targets for 3 consecutive years.
Right.
And he's tied to, arguably the best quarterback of our generation. No disrespect to Tom Brady out there, but Aaron Rodgers does things that Tom Brady could never, ever do in his wildest dreams. So I think that anybody that's putting anybody besides Devontae Adams as their wide receiver 1 is looking for clicks.
Well, and plus, they're not going to bring in another wide receiver. We all know they're not going to bring one in.
And even if they did Curtis Samuel, Devontae Adams would still
change my mind. Yeah.
Have you seen any other team that does what the Packers do? They'll get first and goal at the 1, and they'll target Devontae Adams 4 times in a row.
In a fade route in the end zone.
Yeah, I am convinced that Aaron Rodgers had Devontae Adams on every one of his fantasy teams last year.
Dude, it feels like they're playing backyard football, and you just got the one player, and you got the best player on the field on your team, and you're like, I'm just going to throw it up to him. Yeah, they're probably going to catch it. We're going to get a touchdown. It's going to happen.
If your other option was Equanimeous St. Brown,
yes,
would you blame me for throwing it to Devontae Adams no matter what?
I will say one thing. It's the reason why I'm always skeptical of repeating wide receiver 1 numbers, because I think Devontae was wide receiver 1 last year, right? Even though he played 13 games or whatever it was.
Year that we had, he was wide receiver 1. Yes,
right.
Year before,
and it's just
I don't think he was because of injuries.
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't see players repeat very often. I mean, I think Antonio Brown did it, except for Travis Kelce, but Antonio Brown did it a few years ago. But that's about it. But if there's a player to do it, I would pick Devontae Adams this year, just because their connection is absolutely insane. The volume is just going to be there, and it's a smash. For sure.
Yeah, I think the other smash is you touched on it. QB1 Dak Prescott for me. If he's healthy week 1, I'm so sold. That defense is not good. I love that they might add Patrick Surtain. I think that'd be a great pickup. That defense will still be not good. Mike McCarthy will still not be a good head coach. And Dak Prescott's going to have to put that team on his back. And unlike my favorite put the team on the back syndrome quarterback of all time, noodle arm Phillip Rivers, back when he wasn't the noodle arm, back when he was in San Diego, and it's like, nobody can win this game but me. Here's the thing. Dak Prescott can actually win a game for you. He's got the athletic tools. So I love to see it. So I'm 1,000% on board with that. All right. We're going to cut through some of this and get to my guys and stayaways. We're going to end this with that, and then we'll get into the plugs. Dave, who is the one guy you are going to make sure you leave a draft with for redraft, and who's one guy you're going to avoid at all costs?
Well, I wrote down a few here because we were getting down to the end of the show, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't talking about somebody we've already talked about a bunch. One guy we haven't mentioned is Courtland Sutton, and I am trying to leave every single draft with Courtland Sutton. This dude has all of the makings to be I hate throwing the term alpha receiver around there because I feel like it gets used way too often, but this man is 6'4". I mean, the recency bias in fantasy football is insane. We saw this guy in 2019 absolutely dominant with, who was it? Drew Lock, Joe Flacco, and was it Brandon Allen? I think was the
Checks out.
whoever it was. It was terrible. And
Jeff
this guy
Driscoll.
was still I can't even remember, but he put up over 1,100 yards, had 6 or 7 touchdowns, and I mean, he just looked like that one of those premier receivers in the league. And I think that he has all of the makings to be the next, Allen Robinson, one of those types of players. So everybody right now is forgetting about him. His draft stock now is way lower than it was heading into 2020. So I'm taking advantage of that market inadequacy and getting as much Cortland Sutton as I can.
I think that's an excellent pick. Who are you making sure you avoid, though?
Deshaun Watson. No, really though. I at this point, I mean, I was in best ball drafts earlier and was taking him, but it looks like he's not going to be playing. So I'm avoiding Deshaun Watson. But really, I couldn't think of a specific player because I don't hate players. I do hate some ADPs. I'll take anybody at the right cost. But something that I am avoiding just as a whole this year are any of those mid-tier tight ends. So TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant, Mark Andrews. I don't want anything to do with those guys. If I'm unable to get Kelsey, Kittle, or Waller, I'm just waiting until like the last 3 rounds, and I'm going to take 3 tight ends and hope one of them pops off. Because really, once you get down past that big 3, last year, it was absolutely insane how close like wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 24 were just a few points per game off from each other. And really what it comes down to is who's going to score the most touchdowns at the end of the year, which none of us can predict. So I'm not wasting a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round pick on somebody who's going to be, maybe 1 point per game better than somebody that I'm drafting in the 18th round. So as a whole, I'm just avoiding those mid-tier tight ends.
Yeah, you're not the first guest we've actually had to say that. Jeff Crisco came on a while back, and he's just like staying away from the middle class tight end. It's not a real thing. Like once you get out of that top 3, it's like, well,
just
why not get out of the top 8? Why not get out of the top 12? Like, why not take Blake Jarwin with a dirt cheap pick? See
Thank
what
you
happens.
For Blake Jarwin. That's like exactly the guy that I'm targeting late in these rounds too.
Exactly.
Gerald Everett is kind of interesting late.
Another one, yeah.
Yep, I would totally agree.
The gap between wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4, so that where that fall off is, that same gap, if you go down to wide receiver 20, or I'm sorry, tight end 20.
Yeah,
that's the same amount. I meant tight ends, but the fall off there, I mean, it's unbelievable once you get past that big 3.
What about you, Sam? Who is the person you're making sure you leave the draft with, and who's the person that you are just saying no thank you?
So I've been banging the Jalen Hurts drum since he was drafted, actually. And so Jalen Hurts is absolutely somebody I really want to leave my draft with. However, his ADP is rising a lot, and so I'm a little sad about it because I was like, man, I'm going to take Jalen Hurts in every single league next year because, it's just he doesn't have the draft capital that you'd want. We know that second round quarterbacks don't always hit, but I just think Jalen Hurts was kind of underdrafted in the NFL draft. Kind of got the Lamar Jackson treatment because he was fantastic in college, and we know he has the rushing upside to give you the QB1, honestly. If he plays the whole year, I wouldn't be surprised if he manages to do something like that just because he has his rushing upside. Now, I definitely think it's unlikely. I'm not trying to, say he's going to be QB1, but Jalen Hurts is absolutely someone I'm trying to leave with. I think he's a lot better than people say. No, he is not worse than Taysom Hill. I remember arguing about that with people on Twitter. Whew, just gets my blood boiling thinking about it right now. But someone that I think I'm avoiding is DeAndre Swift. And I'm with you, Dave, that I don't necessarily hate players. Again, I listen to the Podfather a bunch that he always says it. I don't hate players. I hate ADPs. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's just kind of true because we want players to succeed, right? And there's obviously all these players are very talented. They're in the NFL, which is extremely hard to do in the first place. So, but DeAndre Swift is someone I am kind of out on. And, I like the talent. And I think in Dynasty, I definitely want DeAndre Swift. But as far as, 2021 goes, we talked about earlier, the Detroit Lions are not going to be good. He might have the volume, but we've seen players in the past that have been elite that have fallen off like the next season because their team was just so bad. Todd Gurley, and Saquon Barkley both had seasons that we expected them. They were drafted super high and just didn't return ADP. And I think DeAndre Swift will be someone like that this year.
Yeah, I think DeAndre Swift is an interesting one. I would say a counterpoint to that could potentially be James Robinson was on about as bad team as you could get last year and was a RB1 candidate.
Right.
And then on top of that, with Todd Gurley and Saquon in those years, though, didn't they have some injury issues? It was just
Todd Gurley didn't. He finished as the RB18, I think, and I think maybe Saquon did.
Okay,
I just remember like that year. That was one of my first shows I ever did. I was like, I know nobody wants to admit it, but Saquon Barkley is going to be bad, or not necessarily bad, but he's not going to live up to RB1 hype just because the Giants were so bad that year. So.
But the Jalen Hurts thing is something I really want to touch on because I think his ADP is getting a little steep.
It is getting a little high.
Concerns about that. And so I've been thinking like we always have that second year breakout QB. I've been thinking about who it's going to be because typically with that second year breakout QB, the ADP is also lower. Like people always talk about like, I got Lamar so late. I got Pat so late. I think next year it's going to be Joe Burrow.
I like that.
I think next year I've like thought about because like, I think the best thing that also happened for that is people are hyped on Justin Herbert. I don't think the gap between Burrow and Herbert is big at all. And I think if Joe Burrow comes back healthy, if they can protect him a little more on that line, he's got the tools already. He was looking like a QB1 candidate last year when he was healthy anyway. I mean, throw the ball 60 times a game, you're bound to hit some.
Yeah.
I think Joe Burrow could be that breakout guy. So he's someone that's like, if I can get him in round 10 or later. Like,
if they don't take Sewell,
then I'm more concerned.
First of all, mistake by the Bengals, but also, then I would be concerned. But if they do take Sewell, I'm absolutely with you, man. He was QB9 till he got injured, which is top 10 and very impressive as a rookie, so. I don't mind it.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. It has been a blast. We have crushed the hour-ish. We have crushed the hour and a half-ish. We crushed the hour 45-ish, one of our longer episodes, but that's what happens when you get such high-quality guests. You have to let the content play out as it does. And speaking of that content, Sam, why don't you plug what you got coming up?
Honestly, I'm not doing a ton right now other than working on the FPO podcast. It's just a game show. We are having guests on weekly right now, and we're hopefully going to start getting to multiple guests, going on YouTube, getting some video out, doing some live streams. Right now, we're only doing a podcast form of it, and it's out pretty much anywhere you listen to your podcasts. So I'm just working on that right now. I might be writing a few articles here and there. Obviously, I just talked about the one that I wrote recently about running backs. But that's pretty much all I got. I'm on Twitter, spending way too much time on Twitter, probably at Sam Darrell BFF. So yeah, come hang and interact with me. And thanks for having me on.
Dude, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. Dave, it has genuinely been a pleasure to have you on as well. Thank you so much for coming on this show. I think it's been great to have someone with your background working for a site like Fantasy Pros, coming on here, giving really good advice. That Mike Tagliere story, I really enjoyed that. Yeah. What's some of the content you got coming out the pipeline? We've teased some of it throughout the episode, but bring it on back. Let the audience know what you got coming.
All right. So I got an article coming out tomorrow morning for Football Guys. And then tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern, we've got Eric Moody coming on our Friday show, which I've got every Friday coming on. That's a really fun one. The following week will be a good one as well. We've got Denny Carter and Cooter Doodle coming on for what should be one of the more fun shows that we've had.
That's going to be Friday amazing. Afternoon. I will definitely be watching that.
Very excited for that one. But really, I'm trying to guest on as many pods as I can. I write for a bunch of different publications. So if you want to see what I got going on, the best thing to do is just follow me on Twitter at DaveKluge_FF. That's DAVEKLUGE_FF. And you'll be able to see everything that I've got going on right there.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. As always, I'm McLateral. I've been your host this evening. You can find my stuff over at The Lateral. You can catch us on thelateralff.com for the written content. You can catch us on YouTube. You can catch us on Spotify. We've actually got some great stuff coming on this show alone. Next week, we got Laquan Jones. We got LQ and Scott Barrett coming on. It's going to be a blast. And then on April 29th, instead of the weekly variety hour-ish, we are going to have the Lateral mega hour-ish draft special. The entire Lateral crew will be here for the entire draft. We are going to go through pick by pick, round by round, except there's only one round. So, still correct. But you'll get the latest takes from us. You'll get the most sideways things. You'll have me freaking out about who the Niners draft as their quarterback in the future, which is going to be great because that happens real early on. And I'm not going to shut up about it for the rest of the show. So stay tuned for that. And then I have my draft series that I put out the abstract for the part 1, the hypothesis, the other day. I'm going to be knocking out part 2 of that, which is the first 6 rounds of the draft. That's going to come out probably early next week. It'll get finished up over this weekend. And then for the rest of the stuff we got going out, I always forget this stuff. Luckily, I think I have someone that'd be able to help me out.
And welcome to the Lateral Weekly Variety. Did I miss it again? Dude, this is how many weeks in a row? I swear.
Well, we had an important guest this week too. I mean, like Sam, whatever, but like Dave's here.
Exactly.
Dude, we gotta get the signals uncrossed because I show up late to every single show. How do I keep missing this? Oh,
it's your StreamYard account. I don't know.
It doesn't make any sense. Oh God. Oh Jesus.
Better late than never.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Oh God. Well, in terms of other things that we have going on, you can find me at Herms NFL on Twitter. Don't find me anywhere else. I don't want you to find me anywhere else. I do a show called Show with No Name because we're not very creative with my buddy Jesse at BGF Sports. And dude, it's going to be cool. Coming up on Sunday, we will have Victoria from the Ball Blast crew. We'll have Mike, Daddy's Home FF, doing all that stuff. We're going to be calling our shots, looking at like early redraft. Words are hard. Early redraft sleepers. It's going to be really cool because like we've been going through doing like the early ADP stuff, and we were like, well, you know what? We're almost at the end of this. Instead of getting too deep into it, why don't we just do the whole Babe Ruth thing, man? Just call our shots, do it, whatever. And that's going to be super fun. We have some other really fun guests coming up, and we're going to be announcing some of that stuff here pretty soon. Actually, we will be announcing a full list of the upcoming guests that we have coming on the Lateral as soon as this show ends. If you follow us on Twitter at the Lateral FF, I mean, just check it out. Hey, how's that for a teaser, man? See, man, that's why they pay me the big bucks. Your boy Herms, the Lateral. What's up? Hey,
none of us make any money. This is like a complete drain.
He makes a great point. Well, Dave makes money, but
if I tell them,
but I don't pay
money, then they will believe that I'm a professional. We have to create the illusion. If we say we make money now, it'll make us make money. Good. Anyway, also just like thanks for tuning in. Exactly, that's what we do. As you can see by me sitting in a, for those of the you that are going to be watching this instead of listening to this, just me, sitting in an ominously dark room at all times. Yep, very professional. But yeah, seriously, I mean, like we got tons of cool stuff. The website www.thelateralff.com. We have a YouTube channel with a bunch of like numbers and letters in the address. So it's like really hard to find, but you can find the link to it on our link tree that we have. So just like, I don't know. Check it out. That's what we got going on. And
And make sure to retweet the show. If you retweet it 250 times, I think Michelob is contractually obligated to send me free stuff. Because that's apparently the latest thing on fantasy Twitter now is Michelob Ultra swag. Didn't see that coming, but there it is. I think that's everything. I think we're done.
Thanks for having me.
Ooh, 201. Yeesh.
Peace out, my dudes.